we look out into the sky, night sky. It's a brilliant night sky, lots of stars, galaxies, nebulas, pulsars, quasars, whatnot, glittering, very bright. Every single dot of light that we see out there, if we add it up together and we contrast that with the mass that we know the universe has, it's less than 5% of the universe's mass. So 95% of the universe's mass is missing. It's dark. It's invisible.
Unknown.
And we don't have the least idea of what that is.
Woof woof. Welcome to Kanha Cast. Today I'm speaking to well-known astrophysicist, historian and geopolitical analyst Abhijit Chavda. He recorded a podcast with Daaji and Kanha, and after getting a tour of the premises, very graciously sat down for a chat in the Kanha studio. So thank you, Abhijit ji, for stepping into the Kanha studio after your day here at Kanha. You flew in this morning, and thank you for just taking the time out. It's been quite a hectic day. So first thing I'd like to ask you, what are your first impressions of this campus?
It's magnificent. It's beautiful. The scale, the grandeur, the greenery. It's something you would not expect in a rather dry, arid place like the region that we are in. So I saw the way the water is being harvested. I saw the way the water reservoirs have been constructed. I saw the miniature rainforests that have been created. I've met the wonderful people here, and I've had the incredible blessing of having an audience with Daaji himself. Overall, a fascinating and wonderful experience.
So this morning you mentioned you had this interaction with Daaji. We had about an hour of conversation. Was there something you expected coming in here? Were there some preconceived notions that what it's going to be like, what Daaji is going to be like?
I made sure that I do not research too much about him. I made sure I come here with a clear mind, a blank mind, without preconceived notions. Of course, his reputation did precede him. I was aware of his achievements, the work he has done and all. But I made sure I do not watch video clips of him so that I can, look at this entire interaction from a blank slate kind of perspective. So I was absolutely fascinated, blown away. The depth and the profundity with which he answers questions, the perspectives that he brings in. He can answer a question from like 3 different unique perspectives. So it was a fascinating interaction. It was about an hour and some minutes. I thought it was about 20 minutes. That's how it felt. The time just flew away. So I was wondering, have I made it too short? But then I realized it's like gone way past an hour. So the time just flew. It was a magical experience.
And have you yourself been interested in spirituality? I mean, growing up in India, we all have certain things that we are exposed to. What has your relationship been with spirituality and religion?
So I come from a scientific background. I'm a trained scientist. And as a child, I was adamant there is no God. So when you're 7 years old, you think you know everything about the universe, and you're like, there's no God. And later on, as I progressed in life, I realized that there are lots of things we don't know about. Science itself can't answer so many things. So right now, I obviously am rooted in my ancestral spiritual tradition, which is Shaivism, all that. And I'm extremely respectful and appreciative of the multitude of spiritual paths that our ancestors over the millennia have taken. So I personally am, if you were to ask me about spirituality, I haven't really trod a single path as such. I have never had the time to go on a spiritual path, on a spiritual journey. I am extremely curious about it. I'm fascinated. I would really love to learn more. Meditation is something I have tried in the past. For example, I have done Vipassana when I was in university. I had a couple of friends who were Burmese monks. So I did that. I learned the technique. But I've never really sustained that, So I'm aware of the incredible spectrum and diverse spectrum of paths that we have. So personally, you could say I'm extremely curious. I'm kind of a seeker. I would love to learn more about it. I would love to go deeper into it. But thus far, I haven't done that. And maybe that's an opportunity for me.
Also, you mentioned the word curious, that you'd always been curious. Now, that is something that I think goes without saying, because you are interested in so many things. You are a scientist, astrophysicist, but your interests range from politics, from geopolitics to history. And how did that come about? I mean, because we see this is a world where people are getting more and more specialized. It's not just history, would be a particular branch of history or a particular time. And even in science, it's like that. But you come across as a person who is interested in so many different fields. How did that happen with you?
I think you're just born with a certain set of traits. So I guess I was born with this curiosity, and I have this. I'm drawn towards mystery. Mysteries, you show me a detective movie, I love it, and science is a mystery. So
Sure.
trying to search for the answers to the secrets of the universe. I mean, 95% of the universe is dark, so that's a huge mystery that kind of draws you into it. And similarly, when it comes to history, a lot of history is a mystery because there are so many gaping holes in the way we understand history, and much of our history has been kind of erased. So there's a lot to discover there are lots of clues lying around. It's once again like a detective a hunt that you're going on. So, and as a kid, I was I found history to be more interesting than fiction sometimes, because as a kid, I was drawn towards world history, Egyptian history, Roman history, all that stuff. I used to read Will Durant's series on the story of civilization.
Hmm.
So I thought it was more interesting than most fiction books. And eventually, I became drawn to Indian history as well. Even as a kid, I used to think it was very depressing and full of dark chapters and all. But now later on I understood that there's much more to it than what we are taught. So I am driven by curiosity. I really enjoy mysteries. I love the challenge of tackling a mystery and trying to get to the bottom of it. So that's principally what's drawn me towards science as well as history. And then I realized over time that as you study history, especially world history, you begin to see certain patterns. You know, empires rise and fall, kingdoms rise and fall. Why do these things happen? Why do these things happen? Why do wars happen? What causes peace? Why do borders get redrawn? And you see the patterns over and over again. And then I realized the patterns of history are still being played out today. And the same principles that you see in history, they apply to today's politics,
Hmm.
international relations. And that's how you understand geopolitics. So there are no textbooks on geopolitics. There are textbooks on history and all. But
Sure.
there's no textbooks on geopolitics. There may be some, introductory level international relations textbooks and all that, but nothing which teaches you this. So I think to understand geopolitics, you really need to understand history in depth. And even over time, I realized that because of my study of history for so many years, I also understand geopolitics. So that's kind of how the journey has been.
So you very much view history as something that is alive, because a lot of people think that history is a study of the past that is dead and gone. It has no life to it. But you feel that history is pretty much alive in our lives right now because those very things are playing out now.
Yes, so we are links in a chain. Each generation is a link in a chain that stretches back 10,000 years at least, from what we know. And obviously, it goes back to the beginning of our species. And then it will stretch forward, God knows how many hundreds of thousands of years. So we are a link in the chain, and we are a living, breathing link in the chain. Eventually, what we are doing here will be remembered as history, perhaps if we do something good enough. And so when we study history, we are studying our own past. And whatever choices our ancestors made, whatever decisions they made, whatever actions they undertook, they influenced the world the way it is today.
Hmm.
So whatever we are living through is a consequence of those choices they made. So it makes sense to study what happened in the past so that we understand why the world is the way it is right now. And if we understand that, maybe we can try and see, look a little bit into the future and see how things could,
Absolutely.
happen.
But it's not an easy study to undertake, actually, history. As Winston Churchill said, that it's written by the victors. And the victors may leave out stuff that doesn't suit them, may put stuff in the way that suits them, misrepresent things. So how do you look beyond that personally? How do you get to the truth?
So that's why it's interesting, because that's where the mystery is. We know that history has been manipulated. We know history has been distorted. Today, if we look at the history of India, it's the history that the British wrote of India. And that's what we are still being taught in the 21st century. So we know that there is an element of some aspect of truth to what we are taught, but we know for sure there are distortions. And how do we figure out what is the distortion, what is the truth, and what are the hidden missing pieces? That's where the detective story comes in. That's where the big mystery is in. So that's why I find it fascinating. And the clues are out there. If you want to solve a historical mystery as to whatever, anything, you have to look at various pieces of evidence, like from archaeology, from literature, from the history, from the way ancient literature, archaeology, even folk tales contain elements of truths. Then you can even use the study of ancient DNA to dig out parts of your deep history. So there's a lot that's out there that will give you clues as to what really happened. And for example, we have the Saraswati Sindhu civilization, which used to be called the Harappan or Indus Valley civilization. But
that's what we were all taught.
Yes. Well, if you look at the number of archaeological sites that we have not even excavated 2% of those. And from the 2% that we have excavated, the oldest one is 9,500 years old. So if we start excavating the ones that have never been touched, just imagine how old our civilization we will discover it to be. So we have not even scratched the surface of what's hidden below the earth, and that's our history, that's our heritage that's lying below the earth in these archaeological sites. And much of that is in India, not in what is currently called Pakistan. So there's a lot to learn once this process begins of excavating these sites. So that's just one example.
But why do you think that we haven't actually explored it in earnest up till now? The excavations have still not been done, and there's no priority given to stuff like this. It's put on the back burner. And even for students, they kind of think of history as not really that important. It's they consider other subjects as more important in school.
Well, it's let me answer the second part of the question first. The way we are taught history is so dull and boring, and secondly, it's something you can't relate with. If you are taught the history of Shah Jahan and Babur and Aurangzeb and all, you don't feel any connection with them because you don't have any connection with them. But when you can start seeing your personal connection with the history you're being taught, that's where you suddenly develop this curiosity and this interest. So the way we are taught is why kids are put off by history. You're forced to memorize dates. You're not taught causality. Why do things happen? Why did this war happen? What were the reasons? What was the psychology behind this king doing this? So XYZ action. Once you look at it from that perspective, it becomes fascinating. It becomes a study of human character and personalities and all that. And cause and effect, the causal chain. So we're not taught history that way. That's why it's so dull and boring. Now, why has all this excavation work not been done? Well, first of all, the primary organization that's responsible for this is the Archaeological Survey of India, which is a colonial institution. It was created by the British in the 19th century, if I'm not mistaken. And at that time, the ASI's primary purpose was to help the British catalog ancient artifacts of India and help them plunder the best out of those back to London or wherever they would stash it away. And if you look at the British Museum, yeah, it's a crime scene. It's a house of theft. That's what it is. So the ASI's original purpose was that. And after independence, after 1947, it really didn't change much. You had the same bureaucratic mindset. You don't have trained archaeologists except one or two here and there. So that's the issue. So they don't have the inclination to do that. And maybe their directive is to just preserve Mughal monuments and Turkic monuments and not look at actual Indian history. And those attitudes are still persisting. And also to excavate lots of these sites, you need a lot of money, and maybe It's not on the government's priority list right now. So these could be the reasons why it's not happening thus far.
So recently there was a famous movie release that actually had both these subjects kind of overlapping, your interests, history as well as physics, Oppenheimer.
Okay.
Have you had a chance to catch the movie yet?
I have seen it.
What's your review of it? What do you think?
I think it's a very interesting movie. It deals mainly with the politics behind the way Oppenheimer was demonized. At that time, there was this very strong anti-communist sentiment in the United States because of the start of the Cold War. The Cold War was about to begin, and by 1950 it had begun. And anybody with any kind of communist connection was seen as a liability and a threat. And also, you see the psychology of a brilliant scientist, of a brilliant physicist. I mean, when you are really brilliant, you don't realize the effect you have on other people. You may say things that will really hurt people, and then if they are powerful, they're going to come back, and one day you're going to pay the price for something you did not mean to say, but you said and you didn't even realize it. So that's the kind of thing it is. And also it deals with the way with the Manhattan Project in some cursory detail as to how the atom bomb project was done and the way it was tested and all that. So overall, I think it's a very interesting movie. I would give it 8.5 out of 10 if you were to ask me to rate it. A brilliant performance by Killian. What's his name? Whatever his name is.
Murphy, I think.
Murphy, right. Also by Iron Man, what's his name? Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, Robert Downey Jr.
And also
Matt Damon's in it also, I think.
Matt Damon's there, and the guy who played Dracula.
The guy, Gary Oldman.
Gary Oldman. He's also there. Some really...
I haven't seen it. I've got so many mixed reviews.
I see.
Some people are really loving it. Some people are saying it's really boring.
Well, it depends on how you like to watch movies. See, when I watch a movie, I get completely immersed in the movie. So even if it's a slow pace, if I find the story interesting, I'm going to like it. So from my perspective, I enjoyed the movie. It was one of the best movies I've seen in quite some time. I mean, these days Hollywood is turning out garbage. So compared to all that, it was like a very welcome change. So overall, I liked it. Of course, I come from a physics background, so that's what made it interesting for me. But also the historical aspect of the whole thing.
So there are a lot of movies actually made on physics and on physicists also. I think there is a movie made on Stephen Hawking. Anyone you think really stands the test in terms of both physics and history?
I cannot remember any. See, physics and history. I can only think of Oppenheimer right now. I've not seen this Stephen Hawking movie.
Yeah, I think what was it called? I'm forgetting what it was called. A Brilliant Mind or something like that.
That was John Nash.
John Nash was Beautiful Mind.
Beautiful Mind, yes.
And Stephen Hawking was it was Eddie Redmayne was playing Stephen Hawking.
Okay, that guy, yes.
Yeah.
I have seen A Beautiful Mind. That's a good movie. It's kind of a fictionalized version of the actual story. I've read the book on which the movie is based. The book is better, but the movie was brilliantly acted and well done. So A Beautiful Mind was a great movie. Oppenheimer was great.
There was also something about Ramanujan that Dev Patel played.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
The Man Who Saw Infinity or something.
Yes, something like that.
I haven't seen the movie.
Among historical movies, I mean, we've had a slew of Indian historical movies also in the last few years. I mean, we've starting with Padmavat and Panipat and Tanhaji and all of that.
I haven't seen any of those. I've given up on Bollywood, unfortunately.
Really?
Yes,
really. It's always very difficult to sort of get to the truth through popular culture. You know, you have to look beyond it in a certain way. And today's day and age, it's getting even more difficult to decipher what news to hear, because you have news that is blatantly pushing an agenda, and you have an opposing news channel also, or an opposing news outlet all over the world. The same story has so many different viewpoints. How does one get to the truth in this atmosphere?
Right. So when it comes to understanding history from popular media, for example, there are so many different versions of the Mahabharata, and many of them try to portray, let's say, Karna as a heroic figure. He's actually the wronged guy who was better than Arjun, which is not the case. If you read the actual Mahabharata, Karna was not that good of a guy. Arjun was far better as a warrior and as a virtuous person as well. Mm-hmm. But for the sake of TRPs and viewership and all, these days people twist stories around to make it a little bit controversial and that sort of thing. So that's why you cannot rely on popular media and popular culture to actually understand your history. There's always going to be some manipulation, some distortion, all that. Now, when it comes to media and understanding if you watch a news story, how do you know whether it's true or not?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, it's almost impossible to know whether it's true or not unless you have been researching the issue yourself. For example, there are so many things happening in the world now, right now. Controversial issues like Ukraine, the Ukraine conflict. There's a civil war that could happen in Africa. So much happening. So, what is the truth? What's behind it? Unless you have analyzed the issue in detail for quite some time, it's almost impossible to know what the truth is. What you could do is, let's say you want to understand what's happening in Ukraine, then you need to take a 360-degree angle kind of approach. Watch what CNN has to say, American media. Watch what Fox News has to say, American media. Watch what the Germans have to say. Watch what the Russians have to say about this.
Yeah, Russia Today, I think that's a channel that...
Yeah, RIA Novosti, Sputnik, all these channels that the Russians have. See what the Chinese have to say. Everything is propaganda. But when you take a 360-degree view of the propaganda, then you will somewhere end up in between, and you will maybe realize that maybe somewhere over here lies the truth. Of course, the real truth will never be visible because much of it is censored out. But if you take a 360-degree angle perspective, then you may get to somewhere near the truth. But of course, it takes a lot of effort to do that. So that's why it's so easy to mislead people today, especially youngsters, because it takes time to understand history. If you know the history of Russia and Ukraine and the Ukraine conflict, it's very hard to mislead you. I mean, if you were to ask me to speak about the Ukraine conflict, I would go back to 1000 AD and start from there, to understand the actual history of the Slavic people and how Ukraine was formed. It was called Ukraina, which means the borderlands of the Rus people. So that's a whole different story, so we'll not go there. But you have to understand the history and the issue in depth. Only then will you not be misled. That's why it's so easy to mislead people. And today, every media house is, it's on someone's payroll. And when you're on someone's payroll, you're going to do what they say. So that's just the way the entire media industry works. It's not news, it's actually agendas and soft propaganda of various kinds. So news comes in flavors today. News comes in flavors.
You can choose what you want.
Yes.
And does this affect the scientific field also, since you've been a scientist? Are there hidden agendas into what is being researched and what is not being researched? What is being funded? What is not being funded?
Absolutely. Science isn't immune from this. So scientists are human beings. They are people. Scientists can be political. Scientists also will have agendas. They will have their own pet project or for such. For example, for the longest time in theoretical physics, especially in the US and in the West, the entire narrative has been taken over by what I call the string theory mafia. So we are trying to formulate, to try and figure out how to reconcile quantum physics and general relativity. Quantum gravity is what we want to find. And we find that thus far we have not been able to reconcile the two. So one of the approaches that was suggested was string theory, which is about one-dimensional vibrating strings. And it comes in various flavors, 10 dimensions, 11 dimensions, 26-dimensional bosonic string theory and whatnot. So if you see the way the US academia works today, if you want to do a PhD in theoretical physics, 9 out of 10 positions will go in for string theory. So unless you want to do a PhD in string theory, if you want to do it in something else, most likely you will not get a position, and you won't have a career. So you're forced to work in this field, which has taken over the entire academic system right now. And that's why since 1981, there's been no new progress in physics. We have discovered things like the Higgs boson and all, but that was predicted in the 1950s or 60s. After 1981, there's not been a single prediction which has been tested and proven right, or anything like that. And string theory hasn't made a single testable prediction, and still it dominates the entire academic system. So that's a great example of a failed theory. It's given us wonderful mathematics and all, but no real physics, and it's not taken science forward. It's not taken our understanding forward. It's actually held us back for like 50 years. So that's a great example of how politics and agendas get into science as well. And then we'll not go into the vaccine issue at all, because
yeah, that's a real hot potato.
Yeah,
my goodness.
So it's the same way everywhere,
Yeah. I mean, and the entire it's something that affects the entire world, and
Yes.
because the world has become so connected now. I mean, maybe perhaps 100 years ago it would have been difficult to do something like a worldwide lockdown,
Yes.
but we saw it happen, because
too.
everything is so connected.
Yes.
So, do you think there is a advantage in being disconnected, or do you think there is actually more merit in having sort of a level of isolation as well?
I think it's technology. It's technology that connects us. Technology is merely a tool. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. So, for example, if you have a stick, you can do something good with it, or you can beat someone with that. The same goes for knives and swords and nuclear energy and all that. It all depends on how you use it. So, for example, we have the internet, we have all this interconnectedness today. We can use it to gain knowledge and understand what's happening about the world. But if we are connected to the internet 24 hours a day, we're going to lose our mind. So we need to know where to draw a line, how many hours a day to be online, and where to disconnect and plug off, and go enjoy nature or whatever. So I think because people cannot control their impulses, because most people are unable to control these impulses, that's why they're always connected to their cell phones and all. And that's why we have all these issues like, mental health issues and whatever those things are. So I think technology is just a tool. It all depends on how you use it. And when it comes to kids, children, I think it's up to parents to guide them, mentor them, and help them navigate this period in which they would be really, they really want to be online all day, but that's not good, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah.
So you are always engaging with such big questions and such, geopolitics, astrophysics, history. It's mentally it has to be taxing. What is your downtime? What do you do to recharge? Do you have a personal sort of recharge regimen?
I don't find it taxing mentally. I enjoy it. But yeah, what do I do in my downtime? I mean, these days I'm not doing it so much. I really used to enjoy lifting weights, gym. It's something I've been neglecting for quite some time now, but that's one thing that I enjoy. The other thing is, another thing that I'm neglecting, that's music, playing guitar, all that. And I like reading. So traveling, of course, if you travel for pleasure, it's fun. If you travel for work all the time, that also becomes taxing. So overall, it's more work these days, but I don't find these topics mentally taxing. Geopolitics, history, physics, that's stuff I enjoy. You ask me to do taxes and all, that's something I will not enjoy. So that's how it is.
Very interesting. And in physics, both at the macro level and at the micro level, we still come up against what could be considered very spiritual sort of questions. That why do we exist? What is the universe made of? Do you find that there is an inherent sort of spirituality, a search for meaning in science?
When it comes to science, we are searching for the answers to the big mysteries of the universe, not the search for meaning as such. So there is a very clear demarcation or distinction between science and philosophy or spirituality. So when it comes to science, we look at physical phenomena and observable evidence, empirical evidence. So it's all about measurements, things that you can measure, things that you can observe, observable phenomena and observable objects, measurable objects. When it comes to philosophy, for example, or spirituality, you have phenomena and objects that are non-physical also, like the soul. The soul is not a physical object. It doesn't have a weight. It doesn't have dimension.
Sure.
So it's non-physical. But philosophy it has logic, but it also deals with non-physical objects and phenomena, and with questions like what is morality, what is ethics, what is God. So there's a very clear distinction from my perspective between science and spirituality and philosophy and religion also. So when it comes to physics, the big questions are, where is 95% of the universe? Because we look out into the sky, night sky. It's a brilliant night sky, lots of stars, galaxies, nebulas, pulsars, quasars, whatnot, glittering, very bright. Every single dot of light that we see out there, if we add it up together and we contrast that with the mass that we know the universe has, it's less than 5% of the universe's mass. So 95% of the universe's mass is missing. It's dark. It's invisible.
Unknown.
And we don't have the least idea of what that is. So about 25% is what we call dark energy, which is, it's what we call dark matter. That's 25%. It's some kind of particle or matter, but we don't know what it is. And 70% is dark energy, which is even more mysterious. It's some kind of fluid or force or something that causes space-time itself to expand. So 95% of the universe is something that's completely unknown to us. We only understand 5%, and that too barely. There are questions even in that. So when we look at it that way, we know next to nothing about the universe, but we are sitting here thinking we know everything, right? So that's the big mystery that we are trying to solve in physics, the big mysteries in physics. And there are bigger mysteries also. When it comes to spirituality, it's a whole different quest. It's the quest of the understanding, trying to understand what is the meaning of life, the purpose of life.
Who am I?
Who am I? Big questions, but totally different questions, not connected with physics. Physics, of course, when you talk about things like, for example, consciousness. Well, consciousness is a thing. It exists. When we see it, we know it is there. You see a cat, there is consciousness there. You see a dog, there's consciousness. You see a rat, there's consciousness. You see an ant, there is some degree of consciousness. You see a stone, most likely from our perspective, there's no consciousness. So when we see it, we know it is there. But we don't even have a scientific definition of consciousness. It exists, but we are unable to even define it, let alone explain it. So there are, and consciousness could be something that is a factor in quantum mechanics, in various interpretations of quantum mechanics. Consciousness causes collapse of the wave function, all that. So that's a big mystery. That kind of comes into the realm of biology, neuroscience, even perhaps spirituality. So in some areas there is some overlap, possibly, but overall I keep these two fields separate and disconnected. That's how you get clarity in your work.
Absolutely. There are some scientists, however, some physicists also, who quote like intelligent design. You know, they think that the universe is just that way, that it had to have been designed by a creator on purpose to have those values that make it possible to have a universe like this. Where do you stand on that? What do you think about that intelligent design hypothesis?
Right. So the intelligent design hypothesis talks about the various values of the various physical constants, the Newton's gravitational constant, and so on and so forth, the fine structure constant, lots of different constants. And we don't know why those constants have the values that they do have. They look like they've been arbitrarily assigned values. And that's one of the big open questions in physics. And it so happens that if you tweak these constants, the values, even by 1% or so, the world becomes uninhabitable and there will be no life possible as we know it. But the fact is that we only know one place on the entire universe that has life, that is this little speck of rock that we live in. So maybe it's possible that if we had a different universe, let's say, with different values of the constants, then we would have seen the emergence of a different kind of life. So this fine-tuning argument from my perspective, does not make a lot of sense. Maybe some scientists will disagree with me, but from my perspective, I mean, no matter how you tune these constants, you will have a different form of life that will emerge. Maybe we can't imagine it from our perspective here. It doesn't mean it can't happen. We know less than 5% of the universe. We understand less than 5%. So I'm sure there are different ways of constructing life. For example, we think of life as a carbon and water-based thing. But you could even have silicon-based life or methane-based life. A life that could exist in stars, nuclear life, who knows, life that the kind of life that we can't even conceive in our minds. So I think this argument it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, the intelligent design argument. When it comes to other arguments like are we living in a simulation, that sort of thing, that kind of makes sense. That kind of makes sense. If you have a powerful enough supercomputer, you can actually simulate a baby toy version of the universe in it. You can, endow it with mass and particles and all that, and define the laws of physics the way you want them to be. And then you can see the entire universe, this toy universe, evolve inside the supercomputer. You can see it happen. Now, if you have a powerful enough supercomputer, you can simulate the entire universe within it. And maybe this universe is a supercomputer and some kid is playing somewhere outside.
The Matrix
or whatever, yeah. So that argument actually makes a lot of sense. It's possible that we may be inside someone's simulation. And if they switch off the button, we are gone.
There's also of course, which has been taken up very avidly by popular culture, the multiverse theory, that there are multiverses existing. I mean, we've had so many movies in the last few years about multiverses, and that I think in a way also counters the intelligent design, saying that there are multiverses in which the constants have different values, perhaps.
So the multiverse concept is not a scientific concept because we can't disprove it. A scientific theory is something that should be falsified.
So it's more philosophical, you would say.
It's philosophy. It's not science. It has math and all that. You can have math in philosophy. So a scientific theory is a theory that can be proven and also falsified. If a theory is not falsifiable, it's not a scientific theory. And when you say there could possibly be universes beyond our own, well, there is no way to falsify it. Let's say I claim that there is a Hawkins pressure cooker in orbit between the orbits of Uranus and Neptune. Well, it's a valid theory, but there's no way to prove it or disprove it. So let's not talk about it, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
similarly, the multiverse theory, it's a philosophical concept, even though it has complicated math and all that, but you can't disprove it. So then there's no point talking about it.
Yeah, so true. So true. So Abhijit, thank you for taking all this time out. I wanted to ask you, what's the future looking like? What are your interesting projects that you are working on in terms of history, science? What are you looking forward to?
So right now I'm doing podcasts. I want to talk with people who know things better than me, people who are more intelligent than me. I want to learn from them, and through the conversations, I hope the audience can also learn something. So there are so many people, great people, wonderful people in India and around the world who can offer so much value, so much wisdom, so much knowledge. So that's what I'm doing right now. Eventually, I would like to write books also, and so on. So that's what's taking up my time right now, and it's a process that I'm really enjoying.
Who would be your dream podcast guest if you could choose anybody from? Let's open it up from the past or as well. Who would you like to interview?
Oh, if it's historical figures, I would like to interview Kanishka the Great. I would like to interview Ashoka the Great, Chandragupta Maurya. Let's interview Alexander the Greek as well, Genghis Khan. I can think of so many historical figures. I think the list can go on.
And in the current time, who would be?
I would love to interview Prime Minister Modi, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, perhaps. There are lots of interesting people all around the world as well, some of whom I've actually spoken with, but there are so many more out there. So yeah, some names, some of those names. Yeah,
Absolutely. For young people who really look up to you, and that Ask Abhijit series was so popular, people asking questions, who would you recommend in these various fields? Who would you recommend? Who should they read in terms of history, whom you look up to? We'll go one by one. Perhaps in history, then we'll go to science, and then geopolitics.
If you want to learn history, well, from the Indian history perspective, I can only suggest R.C. Majumdar, which is a very old publication, and much of it is kind of outdated. It also has the Aryan invasion thing, which is not true. But overall, it's a great resource for understanding history, Indian history in depth. If you want to learn world history, I would suggest Will and Ariel Durant's The Story of Civilization, which is a massive 9 or 10 or 11 volume series. Each book is like it's like a weightlifting thing, but it's something that I really enjoyed reading. So that's what I would recommend from the history perspective. From science, I don't really read popular science. I don't know what to say. I can recommend proper physics books and all, but that's something that, yeah. For physics, you have to first start with like hardcore math. You have to take like a couple of years doing that. Then you start with physics. So I don't know about popular physics, but yeah, so I'm not sure I can recommend anything in physics. When it comes to geopolitics, well, there are no real books on geopolitics. If you want to understand geopolitics, read a lot of history. And then you'll start.
And listen to a lot of podcasts.
Maybe. Podcast will certainly help for sure. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Abhijit ji. It was wonderful that you took the time to sit down with us. And I hope you keep coming back to Kanha, and look forward to hosting you again. Thank you so much.
I would love to come back. Thank you so much for having me. It was a real honor and pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Kanha Cast. Please follow and subscribe to Kanha Cast on Spotify, YouTube, and Instagram. Until next time, woof woof.